The Gospel of Gold by G.S. Lewis. Whose side are you on? For all of Will's quick and articulate responsiveness, this question seemed to give him pause. He frowned, both in thought and, to Gold's eyes, annoyance. "It's always someone else's side," he griped, looking down at one of his hands. "You know, I have trained around the world, making myself and my psychic Pokemon powerful. It was only recently that I was accepted into the Elite Four, but I am not satisfied. I always meant to get better until I reached the top. Losing was never an option. It couldn't be if I meant to shake this status of playing second fiddle to anyone." He looked up, mouth drawn tight. "I don't want to be just another person on Karen's side or Lance's side. I want to establish Will's side, the side which rewards nothing less than the successful pursuit of knowledge. I mean, look at me!" He raised his arms, and Gold watched with interest as several stones lifted to hover around him. Will gave a strained smile. "I can read minds. I can see the future. I can travel long distances in the blink of an eye. And I can move things without touching them." Will let his arms fall, and the stones clattered to the ground. He exhaled in exasperation. "Which of the other elites can claim to do that? None of them! If not for the power they borrowed from their Pokemon, I would be the best by far! Will." The psychic elite stopped and looked at Gold, obviously surprised at the interruption. He seemed almost to have forgotten everything else in his diatribe, but Gold's voice brought him back. "Where are we?" Gold kept his tone polite, but he was anxious for an answer, and Will hadn't shown any signs of ending his rant. The psychic's expression was still masked, but he did not bother to hide his irritation. "A little above Blackthorn City, where the two sides are soon to clash." He gave an affronted snort. "You do realize I saved you, right? The least you could do is hear me out." Gold heaved a sigh. "Look, I'm not ungrateful, okay? But my mind's still catching up with everything. I was here just yesterday morning, and between then and this moment, about 1,000 things happened." He tapped his temple, inviting Will to check for himself. "This is my life now. 10 minutes ago, I delivered poison to a sick Pokemon. And then 5 minutes ago, I got kidnapped by a cop who was actually a Rocket executive. And then 1 minute ago, a guy who I thought was an enemy teleported me all the way across the region back here." Gold shrugged. "No offense, but I can't hide it from you. I really couldn't care less about whatever name you're trying to make for yourself. The opposing sides I asked about are bigger than Lance's, or Karen's, or yours." He felt Will's indignation blaze, but the elite did not lash out at him. Instead, Gold felt the odd foreign presence intrude his mind again, as Will scrutinized him for any trace of guilt. Mentally exhausted as he was, Gold could not have resisted if he'd known how. He saw more images flash in his mind, but the faces that lingered the longest were not human, but Pokemon. He saw Spirit and Silver circling each other above the Whirl Islands, as he had in his last memory of the two. As Will's presence withdrew, Gold saw his shoulders sag. It was so piteous that Gold found himself feeling genuinely sorry for the self-made rising star. "It is no wonder that you find me underwhelming," he muttered resentfully. "After all the wonders you've already seen, what am I to them?" Gold did not know what to tell him. For all his strife, Will was, in the end, a child making sandcastles on a beach. He would build them up until the tide washed in and turned them to shapeless mud mounds. And until he looked up from his own creation, he would not see the magnificent seaside palace looming nearby. "Why did you bring me here?" Gold asked him, attempting to focus on a more productive subject. "Just showing off," Will said, with an indifferent shrug. "To show you that I could. Crossing the sheer amount of distance is far more taxing and risky than most people are aware." He lowered himself to the ground and drew up his knees, staring down on the suburb of Blackthorn below. "But it's not really about location," he added. "I've been meaning to get you alone to ask about something." Gold glanced at him. "What's that?" "Something I foresaw. Something you said in one of those internet videos people took of you." Will tapped his forehead. "I started watching you from fairly early on, but when you were an Ekrotik, you made a pronouncement under some sort of influence. You said that in 3 days, the goldberry seed you planted would rise up to become a full tree." Even through the mask, Gold felt the burn of Will's gaze. "That was 2 days ago. Were you trying to be metaphorical, or did you mean it literally?" Gold shook his head. "I'm not sure." Will tilted his head. "Excuse me? I really don't know. To be honest, I actually forgot about that until you reminded me." At that, Will pinched the bridge of his nose, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Gold was about to question the reaction when he answered. "Last night, I had a vision," the psychic explained. "A whole forest of berry trees, not just one, burst forth into bloom. I was looking at it from an overhead view, rather like a map of the whole Johto region without the obscurity of clouds. Around the borders of Ekrotik City, they were all goldberry." He intertwined his fingers and gripped them tightly. "Now, because I was asleep at the time, I'll grant that it might have been just a dream. But I specialize in future sight, and so does my signature Pokemon, Xatu. I tend to know the difference." Will looked back at Gold. "If nothing else, I can read the signs, and so can Karen. She'll never admit it, but she's scared. Something's changed, and all at once, the tide seems to have turned against her. If her time's coming to a close, I don't want to be dragged down with her." Gold rubbed his head. "I'm sorry that I couldn't give a more specific answer to your question," he said. "But I can tell you what's changed. Silver's power has gone." Will's head snapped up sharply. "The Black Swan!" he shouted, startling Gold backward a step. "He was the Silver in your memory! Why didn't I see it before? Everyone around me was so resolute in their agendas, and whenever I would start to wonder why, he would appear." The psychic elite grasped his head, as if remembering the pain. "He frightened me terribly, and I think he hated the fact that I could see him. Eventually, the only way I could avoid him was to stop thinking about certain things. It became easier with practice, but it was still horrible at times. Like the time you elites tried to deliver me and Lance up to Karen," thought Gold, with blooming resentment. "Yes, like then," answered Will sheepishly, scratching his cheek. I know it's a little late for apologies, but at least I'm not helping with that now, right?" "And why is that?" Gold challenged, against his better judgment. "I'm not hearing an actual apology. Are you secretly a wonderful person and it was all Silver's fault? Or are you abandoning Karen's ship because you suspect she'll lose? As things stand, you're complicit in a lot of dirty business, and it's late in the game." Will furrowed his brow in vexation. "Cut me a break," he whined. "You dodged a bullet thanks to me." "Yeah, but you didn't do it for me," Gold said uncharitably. "You did it because you're on Will's side. Even now, after selling out to Karen and then double-crossing her, you're still hoping to ride the storm and come out on top. It won't happen. I can assure you that Will's side is not the winning side." "How can you?" Will challenged. "Can you now see the future too?" "No," said Gold. "But I've seen the Phoenix. You lingered on her when you checked my memory." He waited for Will to make a reluctant nod before continuing. "You were so terrified of Silver that you couldn't even think straight with him around," Gold said. "But now you can't see him at all, right? That's her doing." Gold pointed toward the horizon in the far-off west. "Spirit restrains him now. She could just kill him outright because she was created much stronger than him. It's not even close. Instead, she chooses to fight the long fight, day by day, because she would rather see him changed." He looked up toward the sky, where there was a break of sunlight through the clouds. "I think that's sort of the state of good and evil, the only two sides that ever mattered. If you're not looking closely, it might appear like they're evenly matched, and even like evil's winning. Evil tends to be insecure, after all. It's always putting up some kind of front." Gold gave Will a significant look. "It won't, though, because it lives on borrowed time. Evil only gets to exist until its ugliness is laid bare enough that people turn from it." Will's posture went rigid. He was clearly, increasingly, offended by Gold's contemplation and its implications. "I advise you," he said softly but venomously, "to consider your next words very carefully. Are you calling me evil? If I say yes, are you going to prove me right by doing something evil?" Gold asked. In the back of his mind, he knew that he ought to be afraid for his life, but a spirit of courage had overtaken him. "I am saying," he added, "that Will's side is amoral on its face, but because it lacks any ethical stance, it can't be called good, and it is prone to evil. You've been rubbing shoulders with killers, after all." Gold shrugged in an unapologetic gesture. "You may win for a moment, but you won't in the long run. The deck was stacked to good before the world was made. So, if you want my advice, do the right thing and start helping the good guys. Not because it's good for you," he pointed at Will, "but because it's good for you." Will stared hard at him, and Gold sensed a subtle shift in the air around himself. The psychic seemed disturbed and held forth two trembling hands, as if to grasp Gold by the head. Again, Gold felt something paraphysical that he couldn't put into words. The elite gave a groan of frustration and let his arms fall limp. "What is this?" he muttered, pushing a hand through his hair. "You're not the same person I read just a minute ago. How? Are you blocking me?" "I am still Gold." He put out his hand. "But I speak by the spirit." "What? I don't..." Will looked down at the proffered hand. "What's this about?" "Choice," answered Gold. "It is time for you to make one. Either take me to Karen, as she commanded you to do, or return me to Olivine City so I can finish my business there." Still, the psychic hesitated to take his hand, just as Ariana had resisted his own before. "What if I do neither?" "Then that is also your choice," Gold said simply. "But take me back, and you'll get to see, firsthand, that I also heal by the spirit."